Karen called the cops on me the same morning she broke into my house, and I swear I almost laughed when she did it. Imagine a woman standing in your living room in broad daylight, clutching your TV remote like it's Exhibit A in a trial, then dialing 911 to report you for trespassing in your own home. That's the sort of twisted, HOA-certified logic Karen lived by, and until that morning, I thought I had seen her worst. I was wrong. Let me rewind. My wife and I had bought the place 6 months earlier, a 2-story brick house tucked neatly at the edge of an HOA-controlled suburb. We weren't technically under their rulebook. Our deed was grandfathered out of their jurisdiction, but you wouldn't have known that by the way Karen strutted around. She was the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, clipboard in hand, issuing guidelines, like a medieval baroness who believed her word was law. The HOA president technically lived 2 streets over, but everyone knew Karen was the one pulling strings. The first time she confronted me, it was about the color of my garage door. She tapped on it with her manicured nail and told me taupe was the neighborhood standard, and that my slate gray was in violation. I explained calmly that my house wasn't in the HOA, but she just tilted her sunglasses down and said, "Well, you live here, so you follow the rules. That's how community works." I smiled, said nothing, and closed the garage door in her face. It should have ended there, but women like Karen don't lose battles, they escalate them. Over the months, I endured her passive-aggressive campaigns, anonymous flyers taped to my mailbox about curb appeal, her Lexus parked halfway across my driveway, her snapping photos of me unloading groceries because trash bins aren't supposed to be visible. I let most of it slide. My wife said I had the patience of a saint, though the truth was simpler. I enjoyed letting Karen dig her own hole. She thought she was winning battles, but I was watching the war unfold. The break-in was her first direct strike, and she picked the wrong Saturday. I was home alone, fixing a leaky pipe in the kitchen, when I heard the unmistakable sound of my front door creaking open. At first, I thought it was my wife returning early from her shift, but then I heard the heels, sharp, impatient clacks across the hardwood. My wife wore combat boots, not heels. "Hello?" Karen's voice rang out like she owned the place. "This is unacceptable. I told you about your blinds." I stepped out from the kitchen, wrench still in my hand, and there she was, standing in my living room, sunglasses perched on her nose despite being indoors, clutching her phone in one hand and my remote in the other, as if to claim the house in the name of the HOA. "You broke into my home," I said evenly. "It wasn't locked," she shot back like that made it legal. "You can't just flaunt community standard. Your blinds are mismatched. It lowers property values." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. "So, you're trespassing because of blinds." "Because of the principle," she corrected, her voice swelling. Then she dialed 911. I swear to you, I thought she was bluffing. But no, she actually pressed call, held the phone up like a badge of honor, and declared, "Yes, I'm at / my address. There's a man in this house who refuses to leave. Yes. He's aggressive. I feel unsafe." I almost choked. Aggressive? I was standing still, holding a wrench because I'd been fixing a pipe. She angled herself so the dispatcher could hear her trembling voice, then mouthed at me, "You're going to jail." Now, you might be wondering why I didn't just snatch the phone or throw her out right then and there. The truth? I wanted witnesses. If she wanted the cops involved, fine. Let them come. Let them see the mess she made. Karen must have mistaken my calm for fear, because she smirked. She sat herself down on my couch, crossed her legs, and said, "This is why HOAs exist. To keep people like you in line. You think you're clever because you slipped through some legal loophole. But I'm the one who enforces order here. Everyone listens to me." It was like watching a villain rehearse her monologue before the hero shuts off the lights. While we waited for the cops, she kept poking around my living room like it was an open house. She made a show of inspecting the family photos, lifting one off the mantel. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing at my wife's picture in uniform. "My wife," I answered, already savoring what was coming. She looked stern. Teacher? Security guard? I just smiled. Something like that. Karen set the photo down and tooted. Well, maybe she could talk some sense into you. Because once the police arrive, you'll be escorted out, and we'll finally have some peace around here. I leaned against the doorway and let her ramble. Every entitled word out of her mouth was rope around her own neck. The arrogance wasn't just amusing, it was insurance. When the flashing lights finally painted the street outside, Karen sprang up, smoothing her blouse like she'd been rehearsing this moment her whole life. She strutted to the door, ready to greet her cavalry, and threw it open dramatically. 2 officers stepped inside, but before they could even get a word out, Karen barreled ahead with her performance. Officers, thank goodness! This man broke into this house and refused to leave. He's been threatening me with tools and shouting. I'm terrified. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let the silence hang until the officers looked at me, then back at her. Something about my posture must have thrown them off, because I wasn't cowering, I wasn't protesting. I was calm, measured, almost entertained. Sir, one officer finally said, do you live here? Yes, I said simply. Karen barked out a laugh, too sharp and too forced. Oh, don't listen to him. He's lying. Ask the neighbors. They'll vouch for me. Everyone knows who belongs here. The officers exchanged a glance, the kind that says we deal with this sort of circus daily. One asked me for ID, and I handed it over without hesitation. Karen leaned in, smug, waiting for her victory, until the cop nodded and said, everything checks out. That's when Karen's smile faltered. No, you don't understand. He's dangerous. Look at that wrench. He was going to attack me. Ma'am, the officer said, his patience thinning, why are you in his house? It wasn't locked, she repeated, her voice climbing an octave. And someone had to do something about those blinds. The officers looked at her like she'd just admitted to stealing cookies and calling it justice. One of them radioed in a note, the other asked her to step outside, but she refused. She planted herself in my foyer, arms crossed, declaring she was the guardian of community standards. That's when the sound of boots echoed down the hall. My wife had come home, earlier than expected, uniform still on from her shift. She stepped into the room, every inch the authority figure Karen had been pretending to be. And I swear, you could see the exact second Karen realized she'd walked into a trap she didn't even know existed. The cops straightened up, recognizing my wife instantly. Karen's face drained of color. And me? I finally let myself smile, because this was only the beginning. The silence after my wife stepped into the room was delicious. Karen had been mid-rant, her voice pitched high enough to rattle the chandelier, but when the sight of my wife in full uniform registered, her words withered like grass under a torch. My wife stood straight-backed, her badge glinting under the living room light, her face calm and unreadable, the kind of expression that told you she didn't need to raise her voice to be in charge. The officers instinctively shifted to her side of the room, as though gravity had realigned itself. Karen blinked rapidly, her lips twitching like she was searching for an escape clause in her own speech. You're his wife, she stammered. Yes, my wife said simply, her tone neutral but edged with steel. And you are standing in my house. Care to explain? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land. For once, words didn't tumble out immediately. She seemed to realize she'd just dialed 911 on a police officer's spouse inside that officer's own home. But Karen wasn't the sort to fold gracefully. No, she doubled down. This is a misunderstanding, she sputtered, forcing a chuckle. I was just checking on the neighborhood, making sure everything was secure. It's my duty as HOA liaison to the board. I didn't know this was, well, I didn't know you lived here. Funny, my wife replied, her eyebrows raising a fraction. Because you were just holding my husband's property, accusing him of trespassing in his own home. You had time to look at my picture on the mantel. You even called the police. But now you claim you didn't know. The officers shifted uncomfortably. They didn't need to say it. The situation had gone from petty neighborhood squabble to attempted unlawful entry and false police report. Karen flicked her gaze toward the cops, desperate for backup. You believe me, don't you? I mean, surely you can see what's going on here. He doesn't respect community rules, and if we let people like that run wild, we'll all be overrun with chaos. Blinds, garage doors, trash bins. There has to be order. My wife took a single step forward, and Karen shrank back involuntarily. Order, my wife said quietly, doesn't come from breaking into someone's home and lying to law enforcement. It comes from respecting boundaries. You're not above the law, no matter what role you've invented for yourself. For a moment I thought Karen might faint. But then her survival instinct kicked in. Entitled people never concede outright. She tried to pivot, painting herself as the victim again. I was only trying to help. If I'm guilty of anything, it's caring too much about the neighborhood. I couldn't stop myself from laughing. Yeah, you care so much you commit breaking and entering. Saint Karen of the suburbs. The officers gave me a look that suggested I should keep quiet, but even they smirked. Karen's performance was collapsing under its own weight. One of the officers finally said, "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come outside with us." His tone left no room for argument. But argument was Karen's native tongue. What? No, I'm not going anywhere. I've lived here 22 years. Everyone knows me. If you want to question someone, question him. Question them. She pointed dramatically at my wife, as if her uniform was some elaborate Halloween costume. You can't just take their word for it. Do you even know if she's really who she says she is? That was the wrong thing to say. My wife, without breaking eye contact, calmly reached into her jacket, pulled out her official ID, and handed it to the officer. He studied it, nodded, and gave Karen a look that said, "Checkmate." Karen faltered, her eyes darting between us, her cheeks blotching red. For the first time since I'd met her, she seemed to grasp that the little empire she'd built with clipboards and committee whispers didn't extend into the real world of laws and badges. Still, she couldn't give up. She tried a new tactic, tears. She sniffled, her voice cracking. I'm just a woman trying to keep my community safe. Is that a crime now? Is that what this world's come to? The performance might have swayed a softer audience, but not this one. The officers were unmoved, my wife was stone, and I was too busy enjoying the irony to care. Finally, the senior officer said, "Ma'am, you've made a false report and you're trespassing. At this point, you can either come outside with us calmly, or we can escalate this." Her eyes widened. "Are you threatening me?" "No, ma'am," he said with tired professionalism. "I'm explaining the law." Karen froze, torn between pride and self-preservation. For once, self-preservation won. She allowed herself to be guided outside, though she kept muttering under her breath about corruption and conspiracies and how the whole neighborhood would hear about this. When the door closed behind them, my wife turned to me. The stern lines of her face softened just enough for a smile. "Well," she said, "that was an entrance." "You missed the pre-show," I told her, leaning on the wall. She had me pegged as an intruder in my own house. Even called 911 on me. My wife shook her head, disbelief laced with amusement. She really doesn't know when to quit. We stood there for a moment, letting the tension drain, listening to the muffled sound of Karen's voice outside. Neighbors were beginning to gather, curious about the flashing lights and raised voices. This wasn't just an incident anymore. It was a spectacle. That was when the first twist landed. Karen's version of events wasn't limited to my living room. While the officers tried to reason with her outside, Karen whipped out her phone and started live streaming. Yes, live streaming. To the HOA Facebook group. "This is the injustice I face," she declared to her audience of equally bored suburbanites. "I was only protecting our neighborhood, and now I'm being treated like a criminal. Do you see what's happening? This is corruption. This is intimidation. They're trying to silence me because I speak up for what's right. My wife and I watched from the window as she broadcast her meltdown, pacing the lawn like a revolutionary leader. The officers looked exhausted, but they didn't stop her. They knew it was easier to let her burn her own credibility in public than to drag her away kicking and screaming. Neighbors whispered. Phones came out. The spectacle grew. "This won't end tonight," my wife murmured. She was right. Karen wasn't just embarrassing herself, she was laying the groundwork for something bigger. She would twist this into a crusade, and the HOA, hungry for drama, would rally behind her. And I knew then that what happened in my living room was just Act 1. Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Later that evening, after the officers finally left with a written report and Karen stomped back to her house, still live-streaming her grievances, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table. She rubbed her temples, exhausted. "Do you want me to file charges?" she asked. "We have enough, trespassing, false reporting. We could push this." I considered it. The temptation was strong. But I shook my head. "Not yet. She's already digging her own grave. If we file too soon, she'll spin it as us trying to crush her. No, let her climb higher. When she falls, it'll be from her own ladder." By Monday morning, Karen's crusade had already mutated into something larger than herself. The HOA's private Facebook group, which I'd wisely muted months ago, was now filled with fiery posts, screen grabs from her livestream, and comments dripping with outrage. Words like tyranny, negligence, and danger to our community were tossed around as if we lived in some occupied territory instead of a quiet suburb with manicured lawns and overpriced landscaping. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors who thought I should know what was being said about me. Most of it was laughable. Apparently I had threatened Karen with a wrench, barricaded myself illegally inside a foreclosed home, and my personal favorite, faked a marriage to a police officer to avoid arrest. I sat on the porch sipping coffee, scrolling through the madness, and thinking how Karen had the creativity of a crime novelist but the logic of a child. Every thread followed the same pattern. Karen playing the martyr, her supporters piling on with righteous indignation, and a few cautious voices saying maybe, just maybe, it wasn't quite as dramatic as she painted it. Those voices were promptly drowned out. My wife had already left for her shift, her uniform still sharp in my mind when I closed the door behind her. She had shrugged the whole thing off, saying the department already knew what Karen was like, and they wouldn't give her antics the dignity of more than a footnote. I, on the other hand, knew Karen wasn't content with a footnote. She wanted headlines, even if they only existed in our HOA newsletter. By noon, I got my first knock at the door. Not Karen this time, but 3 board members, clipboard warriors in pastel polos. They introduced themselves stiffly, as though rehearsing for a deposition, and told me they'd received formal complaints about my confrontation with a community leader. The way they said community leader, you'd think Karen had just returned from a diplomatic summit instead of breaking into my house like a raccoon. "Let's get this straight," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Karen entered my home without permission, called the police on me, and live-streamed lies about it. And you're here to what? Issue me a warning." The man in front, whose sun visor sat too high on his forehead, cleared his throat. "We're here to mediate. This neighborhood thrives on harmony, and it seems there's been a breakdown of trust." I let out a laugh, short and sharp. "Trust? She trespassed." "That's your perspective," another board member said, glancing nervously at her notes. "From Karen's point of view, she was addressing a community concern. Her point of view is irrelevant when she's standing in my living room holding my TV remote," I shot back. "Unless you'd like me to try the same in your house and see how community-minded you feel about it." They shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't come for fairness. They'd come to appease Karen, to protect their fragile little bubble of HOA order. "We'd appreciate it if you'd attend an emergency board meeting tomorrow evening," the visor man finally said. "It's important for us to resolve this collectively." I almost declined on principle. But then I pictured Karen standing there, relishing her audience, spinning her narrative while everyone nodded. I smiled. Sure. I'll be there. When they left, I called my wife. They want me at some kangaroo court tomorrow night, I told her. Good, she replied without hesitation. Go. Let her run her mouth. I'll come too. The next evening, the community hall buzzed like a hive. Folding chairs in neat rows, a table of board members at the front, and Karen holding court in the center aisle like a star witness. She wore a tailored blazer this time, as if dressing for television, and every time someone greeted her, she placed a hand on her chest and gave a weary smile, like a soldier returning from battle. When I walked in, a hush fell. Karen seized the silence like a conductor. There he is, she announced, pointing at me with theatrical flair. The man who terrorized me in my own neighborhood. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I swear, some people were eating popcorn. My wife, in uniform again, followed quietly behind me, and that's when the tension shifted. People whispered, necks craned. The sight of her badge didn't fit neatly into Karen's story. The board chair cleared his throat. We're here to hear both sides and restore peace to our community. Karen, please share your account. Karen launched into it like she'd been rehearsing for Broadway. She painted herself as the vigilant guardian, patrolling the neighborhood, bravely confronting me about unauthorized modifications to my property. She said I'd threatened her with a wrench, loomed over her menacingly, and tried to silence her by calling in a fake officer impersonating his wife. Every detail was twisted, every pause filled with her own gasping breaths. She even dabbed at her eyes with a tissue for effect. The audience lapped it up, nodding, murmuring, some even glaring at me. Karen had always been a master of optics, and here she was at her peak. When it was my turn, I didn't bother with theatrics. I stood, hands in pockets, voice calm. Karen broke into my unlocked front door. She called 911 to claim I was trespassing in my own house. She live-streamed her lies to the HOA Facebook group. And when the officers arrived, my wife, who is in fact a real police officer, walked in and confirmed everything. That's what happened. I sat down. No tissues. No dramatics. Just facts. The board shifted uncomfortably. They wanted fireworks, not stone. Karen jumped back in, flustered. He's lying. Don't you see? This is all part of their intimidation. They want me silenced. They think their badge makes them untouchable, but I won't be bullied. That's when my wife finally spoke. She'd been silent, a looming presence in the back of the room. She stood, pulled her badge from her jacket, and said in a voice that cut through the chatter, "Everything my husband just said is true. I was there. I responded as a private citizen, but I witnessed enough. And if this board has any interest in the law, you'll recognize that Karen broke it." The room went dead. No one had expected her to speak. And just like that, the narrative cracked. Some faces softened toward me, doubt spreading like ink in water. Karen tried to shout over it, but the momentum had shifted. The board chair fumbled, desperate to salvage control. Let's not assign blame tonight. Let's table this until we have more evidence. Translation: they didn't want to confront Karen outright, but they couldn't ignore my wife either. Karen stormed out before the meeting ended, slamming her chair back, muttering about corruption and vendettas. The board adjourned awkwardly, leaving the room buzzing with whispers. On the walk home, my wife squeezed my hand. "She's not done," she said. "No," I agreed. "She's just getting started." The next morning, I found proof she'd escalated. Taped to my mailbox was a flyer, printed in bold letters. "Protect our community from dangerous outsiders. Say no to lawlessness." Underneath was a grainy photo of me carrying the wrench, screen-grabbed from her livestream. She was running a smear campaign. And that's when I realized, Karen wasn't just fighting me. She was mobilizing the whole neighborhood. The war had officially begun. By the end of the week, my street looked like a political battlefield. Karen's flyers multiplied overnight, plastered on light poles, stuffed into mailboxes, even taped to recycling bins. Each one screamed about lawless outsiders and dangerous individuals undermining community values, complete with that same grainy still of me holding a wrench. She had circled the wrench in red ink, as if it were a smoking gun. People walking their dogs slowed down in front of my yard, reading the flyers tacked to telephone poles, whispering to each other. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked suspicious. I would have ignored it if it stopped there, but Karen wasn't satisfied with gossip. She wanted control. She wanted humiliation. So she escalated. On Friday morning, I walked outside to find my trash cans tipped over and their contents strewn across the street. Chicken bones, paper towels, old coffee grounds, all spread like a crime scene exhibit. Someone had taken the time to smear food waste across my driveway. A not-so-subtle message. I cleaned it up without a word, but I noticed Karen watching from her lawn chair, sunglasses hiding her eyes, a glass of iced tea in hand like she was watching a show. She raised her glass at me when I looked up, a mock toast. That evening, another knock came at my door. This time, it wasn't the board, it was a neighbor I actually liked, an older man named Frank. He leaned against the railing, shaking his head. "They've got people talking, you know. Karen's telling folks you're unstable, violent, that your wife's abusing her authority to protect you." I wasn't surprised. And people believe that? Some do. Most are just entertained. But here's the thing. She's pushing the board to vote on community enforcement measures. Basically, giving them the right to fine you even though you're not in the HOA. I raised an eyebrow. "They can't do that." "They'll try," he said grimly. "Karen says it's about precedent. If they let you slide, others might too." So that was her play. If she couldn't control me with flyers and gossip, she'd try to rewrite the rules. The very next day, I saw her plan in action. She'd recruited a little army. Neighbors with clipboards, going door to door, drumming up support for an emergency HOA bylaw expansion. They wore matching shirts that read, "Protect our community." I nearly laughed when I saw them marching like missionaries, handing out pamphlets with slogans like, "No one above the rules," and "Safety through standards." My wife wasn't amused. She came home, tossed one of the pamphlets on the kitchen table, and muttered, "This is harassment, plain and simple. We could shut this down legally tomorrow." But I shook my head. Not yet. She's overreaching. The higher she climbs, the harder the fall. My wife narrowed her eyes, half irritated, half admiring. "You're betting she'll burn herself." "She's Karen," I said simply. "She doesn't know how not to." That night, I heard something outside, metal scraping against concrete. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. What I saw nearly made me laugh out loud. Karen and two of her cronies were in my driveway, hammering stakes into the ground. Between them, a massive vinyl banner unfurled with bold letters, "Unsafe property, community alert." They were planting it like they were marking a toxic waste zone. "Really?" I called out, my voice echoing across the quiet street. Karen spun, caught in the beam of my flashlight like a raccoon. "This is for everyone's safety," she snapped, puffing up. "The community has a right to know they're living near a dangerous individual." "Dangerous because I fixed my own pipes with a wrench?" I asked. "Because you don't respect authority," she shot back. "That's the most dangerous trait of all." Her followers nodded like bobbleheads. I considered tearing the sign down right then, but instead, I leaned against the porch rail, calm as ever. "You know that's defamation, right? You're opening yourself up to legal trouble you can't even spell." Karen sneered. "You won't dare. Lawsuits are for people with reputations. You have none." She finished hammering the stake and strutted off, leaving the banner flapping in the night breeze. The next morning, the banner was gone. Not because I took it down, but because someone else did. When I stepped outside, I found it crumpled in my driveway with the words "Enough, Karen" scrawled across it in spray paint. That was the first sign that not everyone in the neighborhood was drinking her Kool-Aid. By Sunday, the rebellion had grown. Someone anonymously posted a video compilation to the HOA group. Clips of Karen screaming at delivery drivers, berating a kid for riding his bike on the sidewalk, arguing with the mail carrier about mailbox placement. It was titled Karen, Protector or Problem? Within hours, it had more comments than any of her live streams. Karen, of course, accused me of making it. She even showed up at my door, jabbing a finger at my chest. You think you're clever? Posting smear videos? I'll find out who helped you. And when I do, this entire community will turn on you. I let her rant, then asked mildly, why would anyone need to smear you when you do such a great job yourself? Her face flushed crimson, and she stormed off, screeching about defamation and lawsuits. But I knew better. Her grip was slipping. For every neighbor who still nodded along with her, there were two more who'd grown tired of her antics. The cracks were showing. And then she made her boldest move yet. The HOA announced another emergency meeting. This time, not to hear grievances, but to vote on whether to extend authority over non-compliant properties adjacent to HOA jurisdiction. Translation: my house. Karen had maneuvered the board into putting my freedom on the ballot. The night of the vote, the community hall was overflowing. People stood in the back, whispering, some curious, some angry, all eager to see the showdown. Karen sat front and center, her stack of flyers beside her like ammunition. She wore pearls this time, her hair coiffed like she was running for office. When she spoke, her voice dripped with rehearsed sincerity. This isn't about me, she declared, placing a hand on her chest. This is about safety. If we allow one household to disregard our rules, what happens next? Lawns unmowed. Trash bins left out. Cars parked on lawns. Anarchy. We cannot let our community decay because one man thinks he's above order. Her words rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others rolled their eyes. She was staking everything on this performance. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch. Then I said, you all know me. You've seen me mow my lawn, shovel my driveway, keep to myself. I don't bother anyone. The only reason we're here is because Karen broke into my house and lied about it. Everything since has been theater. Flyers, banners, meetings. None of it changes the fact that she committed a crime and hasn't faced consequences. I turned toward Karen, met her eyes. The real question isn't whether you should extend HOA rules to my property. It's whether you're willing to give Karen more power when she's already abused every ounce of it. The room buzzed. People whispered, exchanged glances. Even some of her loyalists shifted uneasily. The board called for a vote. Hands went up, counted one by one. When the tally was announced, Karen's motion failed, by 3 votes. The night after Karen lost her big vote, the neighborhood was electric with gossip. You could almost taste the schadenfreude in the air. Couples whispered on porches, teenagers snickered as they scrolled through their phones, and even the dog walkers exchanged smirks as they passed each other on the sidewalk. For once, Karen wasn't the queen bee, she was the punchline. I should have felt satisfied. In a way, I did. Watching her grand power grab collapse by 3 votes was poetic. But the satisfaction was laced with unease. I knew Karen too well by then. She didn't retreat when cornered. She lashed out. Losing face in front of the entire neighborhood wasn't the end, it was the fuse. The first sign came early the next morning. My wife left for her shift before sunrise, and by the time I went out to grab the paper, I noticed deep gouges running across my lawn. Tire tracks, wide ones. Someone had driven across it deliberately, tearing mud into jagged scars. The kicker? A bent garden stake jammed into the grass with a note attached. Community enforcement. I stood there for a long minute, the dawn quiet around me, holding that note. I wasn't angry, not really. More intrigued. Karen had traded her flyers and speeches for sabotage. She was escalating, and fast. When I told my wife, she pinched the bridge of her nose. That's vandalism. We should press charges now. But I shook my head. Not yet. If we move too soon, she spins it into another performance. Let her keep writing her own script. That afternoon, the sabotage escalated. I opened my mailbox to find it stuffed with glitter. Not just a handful, but a full cascade of the stuff, enough to pour out like sand when I opened the lid. Coated my hands, my shirt, the driveway. Across the street, I saw Karen leaning against her Lexus, phone raised, recording my reaction. I gave her nothing. No rant, no outburst. I calmly pulled the trash bin over, shook the glitter out, and went inside. I imagined her video later that night. Look how he hides after being exposed. She'd probably cut it with ominous music. But the real escalation hit 2 nights later. I woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of water, rushing, splashing, unnatural. I stumbled downstairs, opened the back door, and froze. My backyard was flooding. A garden hose snaked across the lawn, water blasting into my basement window well, pouring inside like a waterfall. I lunged forward, shut it off, and yanked the hose free. My sneakers sank into the mud as I looked up. Across the fence, in the dim glow of a streetlight, I caught the silhouette of Karen retreating, her pearl bracelet flashing as she scurried off. That was the moment my patience finally cracked. This wasn't flyers or gossip. This was damage. Property destruction. She had crossed from petty nuisance into criminal. My wife was livid when I told her. She called her captain, filed a formal report, and insisted we install cameras immediately. Within 24 hours, we had floodlights and motion detectors ringing the property. The message was clear. The game had changed. But Karen didn't back down. No, she doubled down. The very next day, my wife's cruiser, parked in our driveway, was egged. Dozens of eggs, splattered across the windshield and roof. The smell baked under the afternoon sun, sticky and vile. Neighbors gathered, whispering, watching my wife scrub her own patrol car while Karen hovered nearby, feigning concern. "Oh dear," she said loudly, hand to her chest. "What kind of criminal element would do such a thing in our safe community?" My wife's jaw clenched so tight I thought she might break a tooth. She said nothing, just kept scrubbing. That night, Karen delivered her masterpiece. At exactly 9 p.m., the power went out. Not just my house, the entire block. Street lights, porch lights, everything plunged into darkness. Within seconds, flashlights and candles flickered on in windows, neighbors calling out to each other. But then I noticed something odd. One house still glowing, bright as ever. Karen's. Generators weren't common around here. Yet somehow, she had one ready, humming away smugly, her windows blazing like a lighthouse in a storm. And I swear I could see silhouettes inside, shadows of people clapping and laughing. She'd invited her cronies over for a victory party in the dark. I stepped onto the porch, listening. The silence of the street was broken only by her laughter. Then, like clockwork, my phone buzzed. A notification from the HOA group. A new post from Karen, time-stamped right at the outage. This is what happens when outsiders don't follow the rules. Power is cut off to protect our community from misuse. Stay strong, neighbors. We'll endure. The comments poured in instantly. Some furious, accusing her of orchestrating it. Others praising her for her leadership during the blackout. The blackout lasted 3 hours. When the power came back, Karen's house went dark for the first time all night. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The next morning, a utility worker knocked on my door. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, someone tampered with the substation breaker last night. We've got a report filed. If you see anything suspicious," he trailed off. He didn't have to finish. It was official. Karen wasn't just an HOA tyrant anymore. She was sabotaging infrastructure. When I told my wife, she sat down hard at the kitchen table. "This ends now," she said flatly. "No more waiting. No more letting her hang herself. She's escalating into dangerous territory. If she's willing to cut power to the block, what's next? Gas lines? Cars?" I nodded slowly. She was right. Karen had turned our suburban chess game into Russian roulette. But I wasn't going to lose my calm, not yet. One more push, I told my wife. Let her show everyone what she really is. After that, we pull the trigger. My wife didn't like it, but she trusted me. She always had. The trigger came faster than I expected. On Saturday morning, as the neighborhood prepared for its usual weekend routines, lawn mowing, garage sales, soccer games, Karen staged her grand spectacle. She rolled her Lexus into the middle of the cul-de-sac, parked sideways, and set up a portable loudspeaker on the roof. Neighbors gathered, drawn by the absurdity. She climbed onto the hood, microphone in hand, and launched into a full-blown speech. "This neighborhood is under siege," she cried, her voice echoing off the houses. "Our standards are under attack, our safety compromised, our very way of life threatened by those who refuse to obey order. But we will not be silenced. We will not surrender. Tonight we take back control." Her supporters clapped, a dozen or so diehards. The rest of the neighborhood stood back, arms crossed, unimpressed. I stood at the edge of my driveway, sipping coffee, watching the circus unfold. And then Karen unveiled her finale. She held up a folder stuffed with papers. "I have here a petition, signed by dozens of you, demanding legal action against the so-called officer and her husband who think they're above the law. With your support, we will file for removal, fines, and restrictions to protect our community." She raised the folder triumphantly, as though it were the Constitution itself. But then, from the crowd, a voice shouted, "Those signatures are fake." Karen didn't leave the hood of her Lexus gracefully. She slid off like a dethroned monarch, clutching her petition folder to her chest as though it were still a symbol of power. Neighbors scattered back to their driveways, murmuring, shaking their heads. The cul-de-sac, once her stage, was now an empty theater. The spotlight had turned harsh, exposing her rather than glorifying her. But people like Karen don't bow out. They don't lick their wounds in private. They double down. And over the next few days, I watched her spiral. First came the surveillance. Every time I stepped outside, I caught sight of her blinds twitching. When I took the trash out, her Lexus rolled slowly past, Karen inside with her phone raised, recording. When I mowed my lawn, she stood at the corner, arms folded, glaring like a sentry. One afternoon, I found her squatting behind my rosebush with binoculars. When I confronted her, she had the audacity to claim she was monitoring for invasive pests. Then came the anonymous letters. Slipped under my door, left in my mailbox, taped to my garage. Each one typed, full of threats thinly veiled as warnings. "Leave before it gets worse. The community doesn't want you. Accidents happen when people don't follow rules." The kind of cowardly notes that sound more like movie clichés than genuine intimidation. I didn't take them seriously, but my wife did. She insisted on photographing every one, filing them in a neat folder, a paper trail of harassment. She said the captain was watching closely now, waiting for the right moment to make it official. That moment came sooner than either of us expected. It was Wednesday night, and I just sat down with a glass of bourbon when the sound of shattering glass jolted me upright. I rushed to the front hall and saw the source immediately. A brick, lying on the floor among shards of my front window. Taped to it was another note. Final warning. I sprinted outside, scanning the street. And there she was. Karen, halfway down the block, sprinting toward her Lexus like a burglar caught in the act. She didn't even bother with subtlety anymore. I shouted after her, but she didn't turn back. She dove into the driver's seat and peeled away, tires squealing against asphalt. By the time the police arrived, real police this time, not Karen's imagined cavalry, I had the brick bagged, the note photographed, and my security camera footage cued. The officer whistled low as he watched Karen on screen, her pearl bracelet glinting under the streetlight as she hurled the brick. "This is open and shut," he said. "We'll write it up. Your wife's already looped us in. Frankly, we've been waiting for her to cross this line." My wife came home just in time to hear it. Her jaw tightened, her hands clenched, but her voice was steady. "We're filing charges. Tonight." For the first time in weeks, I saw a shadow of fear cross Karen's face, from a distance. When the patrol car pulled into her driveway, lights flashing, she bolted onto her porch, shouting about corruption, conspiracies, and harassment. Her voice carried down the street. "This is persecution. You're all witnesses. They're targeting me because I'm the only one who cares about this neighborhood." Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some recording, some rolling their eyes. Karen paced the porch like a caged animal while officers calmly read her rights. She refused to come quietly, of course. She flailed, shrieked, accused them of being bought by me and my wife. But eventually, they led her to the cruiser, her pearls askew, her blazer torn at the seam. For a brief moment it felt like victory. The dragon slain. The tyrant toppled. My wife and I watched from our porch, side by side, as the cruiser carried her away. But I should have known better. Karen wasn't done. Not yet. The very next morning, the HOA board released a statement. It wasn't about Karen's arrest, it was about me. While recent events are regrettable, we must acknowledge the disruption caused by certain individuals who refuse to comply with the community's spirit of harmony. In order to restore balance, the board is considering measures to ensure future residents align with neighborhood standards. It didn't take a detective to see Karen's fingerprints all over it. Even in handcuffs, she was pulling strings. The neighborhood fractured. Some sided with her, seeing her as a martyr. Others saw her for what she was. Lines were drawn, driveways became borders, fences became frontiers. Walking down the street felt like marching through occupied territory. People whispered, pointed, filmed. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get stranger, Karen came back. Barely 48 hours after her arrest, she returned to her house on conditional release. She strutted down her driveway as if nothing had happened, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf wrapped around her head like some disgraced celebrity dodging paparazzi. Neighbors gathered, watching her dramatic return, while she waved like royalty. But her humiliation had hardened into something darker. She didn't come back to rebuild her little kingdom. She came back for revenge. That night, at 3 a.m., the alarms went off. Motion detectors blared, floodlights snapped on, and my cameras lit up my phone with alert. I stumbled to the monitor and froze. Karen was in my backyard. Not on the sidewalk. Not lurking at the fence. Inside my yard, crouched by the basement window she'd tried to flood days earlier. In her hands, not a hose this time, but a crowbar. I grabbed the phone, dialing 911, but by the time the words left my mouth, my wife was already halfway down the stairs, gun drawn, voice low and steady. "Stay behind me," she ordered. We moved toward the back door, my heart pounding in my ears. Through the glass, I saw Karen wrenching at the basement window, her face twisted in fury, sweat glistening under the floodlights. My wife threw the door open, weapon raised. "Police! Drop it now!" The sound sliced through the night. Karen froze, the crowbar mid-swing. For a moment, she looked like a statue caught in the wrong century. Then her eyes darted to me, wild and desperate. "He made me do it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "He's dangerous. He's forcing me. You don't understand." But my wife didn't flinch. Crowbar on the ground. Hands where I can see them. "Now." Karen hesitated, trembling, torn between fight and flight. But something in my wife's tone, calm, lethal certainty, cut through her hysteria. She dropped the crowbar, metal clanging against concrete, and raised her shaking hands. Within minutes, squad cars swarmed the street again. Officers poured into the yard, cuffing Karen while she ranted about conspiracies and corruption. Her words grew slurred, disjointed, desperate. By the time they shoved her into the back seat, she wasn't the queen of the cul-de-sac anymore. She was just a broken woman shouting into the void. The neighborhood watched in silence. Some filmed. Some clutched robes tighter around their shoulders. No one spoke. As the cruiser pulled away, My wife holstered her weapon and let out a slow breath. "That's it," she said softly. "She's done. This time, she won't talk her way out." But as I looked around at the silent faces in the windows, the murmuring shadows on porches, I knew it wasn't quite over. Karen might be gone for now, but the mess she left behind, the divisions, the paranoia, the suspicion, was still here. The war had shifted. And somehow, I had the uneasy feeling the final act was yet to come. The morning after Karen was dragged off in cuffs for the second time, the neighborhood felt like it had been dropped into a vacuum. No lawnmowers hummed, no dogs barked, no kids rode their bike. People shuffled to their mailboxes with darting eyes, whispered to one another in low tones, and glanced nervously toward Karen's house. It stood there like a haunted monument, blinds drawn, Lexus gone, porch lights still burning in the daylight. For the first time since we moved in, Karen's fortress looked defeated. But silence doesn't mean peace. It means waiting. By the end of the week, the HOA board released another statement. I read it 3 times to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. "We regret the recent disruptions, but we cannot ignore the underlying tension created by those unwilling to conform to the community's standards. While certain individuals may face unrelated legal issues, the spirit of unity demands that all households remain accountable." Translation: they weren't abandoning Karen. They were circling the wagons. I showed my wife the statement. She read it once, set it down, and muttered, "Unreal. She's poisoned them that badly." "She's still in jail," I reminded her. "They're defending a ghost." But ghosts linger, and Karen had loyalists who weren't about to let the story die. It started small. A couple of cars slowing in front of my house longer than usual. A trash bag accidentally dumped in my driveway. Sidewalk chalk messages near my mailbox. Words like outsider and rule breaker scrawled in neon pink. It felt juvenile, almost laughable. But beneath it was a warning. Karen's empire might be cracked, but it wasn't gone. On Saturday, the HOA held yet another meeting, this one framed as restoring harmony. I almost didn't go, but my wife insisted. "If you don't show up, they'll write the story without you. And you know Karen's people will be there." The hall was packed again, though the energy was different this time. Less excitement, more tension. Karen's chair at the front was empty, but her absence filled the room more than her presence ever had. The board chair stood, sweating under the fluorescent lights, and cleared his throat. "We must acknowledge recent incidents. However, we also must remember that our strength lies in rules, in order, in protecting what we've built here. That's why tonight we propose a new bylaw, mandatory compliance for all adjacent properties." There it was again. Their holy grail. A second attempt to drag me into their net. Murmurs filled the hall. Some nodded eagerly, others shook their heads. And then, from the back, a voice cut through the noise. "This is nonsense," Frank barked. He was standing tall despite his cane, his voice gravelly but strong. "You're letting a woman who's not even here pull your strings. She broke into a man's house, vandalized his property, tried to break his windows with a crowbar, and you're still acting like she's the neighborhood savior? Have you lost your minds?" The room buzzed. People whispered. For once, the board didn't have a ready answer. I stood, calm as ever. "Frank's right. This isn't about blinds or garage doors or trash bins. It's about power. Karen tried to crown herself queen, and some of you handed her the crown because it was easier than standing up to her. Now she's gone, and you're clinging to the scraps of her kingdom. But here's the truth. You don't need her. You don't need rules to tell you how to mow your lawn or where to park your car. You need common sense, and you need to stop letting one person's paranoia run this neighborhood." Silence followed. The board chair fumbled with his papers, face red, voice cracking as he tried to steer the meeting back on course. We'll proceed with the vote." But before he could, the doors burst open. And there she was, Karen. She'd made bail, and she chose this moment to return. She swept into the hall like a queen reclaiming her throne, pearls perfectly strung, blazer pressed, hair freshly done. The room erupted, gasps, whispers, even a few claps from her diehards. She raised her hands like a preacher quieting a congregation. "My friends," she began, voice smooth as silk. "I know I've been misrepresented. Lies have been spread. But I am here, standing before you, because I refuse to abandon this community. I have fought for you, suffered for you, and I will not stop until order is restored." It was surreal, watching her stride to the front, ignoring the officers who had cuffed her days earlier, speaking as though she'd been vindicated. Her followers clapped, emboldened. The board chair nearly tripped over himself pulling out her chair. Karen sat, crossed her legs, and turned her gaze on me. "And as for you," she said, her voice dripping venom, "your reign of chaos ends tonight." I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I just watched, calm, letting her dig. She launched into a tirade, accusing me of everything from vandalism to harassment to corruption. She claimed I'd hacked the HOA Facebook group to post videos, that I'd bribed neighbors, that my wife abused her badge to cover my crimes. She wove a tapestry of paranoia so elaborate it almost bordered on impressive. But then she made her fatal mistake. She held up her phone. "I have proof," she declared, projecting the screen onto the hall's projector. A shaky video played, grainy footage of someone in a hoodie smashing a car window. "This," she announced, "is him. This is the man terrorizing our neighborhood." Gasps rippled. But I smiled. Because the car in the video wasn't mine. It was hers. Her Lexus. And the figure in the hoodie? Too small, too slight, too clumsy. From the crowd, a voice shouted, "That's your nephew." Another added, "Yeah, the one who mows your lawn." The room turned. Whispers grew into shouts. The illusion cracked. Frank stood again, pointing a gnarled finger. "You're not protecting us, Karen. You're exploiting us. And you're dragging your own family into your mess. Enough is enough." For the first time, Karen faltered. Her face blanched, her hands shook. She tried to regain control, but the crowd wasn't with her anymore. They weren't whispering. They were jeering. "Resign," someone shouted. "Step down," another added. "Arrest her," a third barked. Karen's composure crumbled. She shouted back, shrill and desperate. "You're all ungrateful. I gave you order. I gave you structure. Without me, this neighborhood will collapse." But no one believed her anymore. My wife rose, her badge glinting. "Karen," she said, voice sharp as steel, "you're under active investigation for harassment, vandalism, and tampering with public utilities. I strongly suggest you stop talking." The board didn't protect her this time. They sat silent, eyes down, the weight of the crowd pressing on them. Karen fled before the meeting even ended, storming out with her pearls rattling like loose chains. Her supporters trickled after her, embarrassed and broken. The vote that followed wasn't even close. The board rescinded the bylaw proposal, suspended Karen from all HOA activity, pending investigation, and promised to review their processes. Empty promises, maybe, but symbolic enough. Walking home, neighbors stopped me, not to glare, but to nod, to shake my hand, to apologize for their silence. The tide had turned.